Today we are doing 7.5, graphing y minus k equals ax minus h squared. And this is an equation of a parabola. And a parabola looks something like this. It's not a U because these sides are flared, and a U would go straight out, like a horseshoe would be straight out. But these ones are flared a little bit on the side, so it is a parabola. The things you need to know about a parabola are the following. You need to memorize this equation right here. You also need to make sure that you know that your vertex is h, k. And your vertex on a parabola is this guy right here. It's where both of these come together. It's the vertex. The A in the equation, if you look here, this A, tells you how wide or how narrow the parabola is. So when you look down here, I have the bigger the A, the smaller the parabola. And that means that it's more narrow. The smaller the A, the bigger the parabola is, so that means it's wide. So if A is positive, you have a parabola that is facing upward. If the A is a negative number, then you have a parabola that is facing downward. So these are the rules that you have to know in order to solve and graph parabolas. When you look here, for example, if I gave you y minus 0 equals 2x minus 0 squared, we are looking at the y minus k equals ax minus h squared equation. Normally this, however, would look like y equals 2x squared. If there's nothing minusing or adding to the x, then your h is 0. If there's nothing minusing or adding to the y, then your k, is 0. So here you know that your vertex is 0, 0 because we're looking at h, comma, y. And the way I remember that it's h, comma, y is that the x comes first and the y comes second. So when you have a point, it's x, comma, y. So you have to put what's next to the x first and then what's next to the y first. So you know that your h is 0 and your k is 0. So your vertex is 0, 0. So when you go to graph this equation, you have the point 0, 0 right here. Then you have to decide how your parabola is facing. Is it facing upward or downward? So our A is positive when you look right here, so we know that it is going to be facing up. Well, right now for today's lesson, don't worry about how wide or narrow it is. Okay, I will teach you how to figure that out in a different lesson. So right now you're just drawing them up or down depending on what your A is. Let's look at this one. What if I gave you y minus 1/2, or actually let's make it y equals 1/2 x squared. First thing you need to find is what h, comma, k is. So what is your vertex? Well, your h is what's always next to x, so there's nothing there, so it's 0. And whatever's next to your y, there's nothing, so it's 0 for k. So when you go to graph this, your vertex is at 0, 0. You have 1/2 for your a, and it's positive, so then you know that your parabola is facing upward. Let me change colors here. Let me give you another one. What if I gave you y equals 1/2 x plus 3 squared? Well, with our equation, we know that we have a vertex h, comma, k. This is my h. And what's tricky about this is it's a plus. But remember, in my equation, I have minus h. So I want to know what just h is. So in my equation, if this is a minus, how would I make it a plus? Well, I would have to have a negative number here. So this has to really be a negative 3 for my value of h, because a negative and a negative become a positive. So in order for this to turn into a plus, this guy must be the opposite sign. So what you have to realize and remember is that h is always the opposite of what you think it is. If it's a plus, it's a minus. If it's a minus, it's a positive. Same with your k, and I'll show you that in a second. So we know this is going to be a negative 3 because it's the opposite of what we see here of that sign. We know that y is 0 because we don't have anything next to the y. So when we go to plot this, we're going to have negative 3, 0, and we know that it is going to be upward. And we'll talk about how do you know where this crosses here in a little bit. Right now I just want to focus on plotting the vertex and whether the parabola is up or downward. Let's see, let me do one more. Let's do y minus 3 equals 1/2 x squared. Well, we know our h is 0 because there's nothing next to the x, and our y is 3 because it's always our opposite sign, because in the equation it is a negative. So what is just k? K is just 3. So we're going to plot the point over 0, up 3. Let's have a look right here. Okay, so we are going to have this up because our a is 1/2. So we're just approximating right now that it's up like that. So let's get into some actual examples. Let's do example number 1. I'm giving you the equation y minus 5 equals negative x plus 2 squared. So again, we're looking at the y minus k equals a x minus h squared equation. We're going to find our vertex, which is h comma k. So we know that h is going to be negative 2 because it's the opposite of whatever sign. And this is going to be a positive 5 for my k. So this is my vertex. Then you need to look at your a. Well, a equals whatever in front of these parentheses. So really it's imaginary 1. So we're going to have a negative 1, which means that our parabola is going to be facing downwards because it is a negative number. So let's start to plot what we know. We're going to plot negative 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the vertex. We know our parabola is facing downward. And again, we'll talk about how you find this point right here, which is going to be point 0, 1. I'll tell you how to find that in a second. And we also know, we also have to find something called the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is an imaginary line that goes through the vertex and cuts the parabola in half. So it means half of what's over here is also over here. So it's just cutting the parabola in half. And since it is cutting through the x-axis, your equation is an x equals equation. And it's not a number. A lot of people say, oh, it's going through at negative 2. And they would say that their axis of symmetry is 2. And they would get it wrong, okay, because it is an equation of a line. And remember when we had lines, let me use a different color, and we had lines like this. Remember, this is an x equals line, and this is a y equals line because it's cutting through the y, it's cutting through the x. We talked about that in a prior chapter. So this has to be x equals negative 2 because it's the line that crosses at negative 2. So that would be one of your answers that you would put on a test. If I asked you what's the axis of symmetry, you would say that x equals negative 2. Another question I might ask you is, where does the parabola cross the y-axis? And remember, these are y-intercepts. Where does it cross the y-axis? That's a y-intercept. So let's go over how to find a y-intercept. you know when you have a y-intercept, you have 0, comma, a number. For sure. No matter where I am on this line, I'm always going to be over 0, up or down, something. So that's why it's 0, comma, blank. So that means that x has to equal 0, but we don't know what y is. So if x equals 0, I can plug that in to my original question. So here was my original question. Instead of having x, I'm going to plug in 0, and I'm going to simplify and solve for y, because I want to know what this y is. So when x is 0, what is y? So I would solve. I'm going to have y minus 5 equals, this is going to be 2 squared, which is 4. Bring down the negative. Then we have to add 4. I'm sorry, we're going to add 5, right? Because we got to get y by itself. And we have y equals 1. So that means we have the point 0, 1. So when I draw my parabola, I want to make sure that my y-intercept crosses at 0, 1. Let's do example number 2. I have y plus 6 equals 2x plus 1 squared. First thing you need to find is what your h equals and what your k equals, so you know what your vertex is. Okay, so I know that h is going to be negative 1 because that's next to my x, and y is going to be negative 6. So my point is negative 1, 6 for my vertex. Then I need to find my axis of symmetry. I'm going to abbreviate it. Your axis of symmetry is always your x value. The reason is when we draw this parabola at negative 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we know that it is going to be upward here in a second. And I think I went the wrong way. I'm sorry. We need to go down 6, don't we? Because it was negative 1, negative 6. I wrote down 6. So let's go down 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Erase this. Excuse me. So again, our h was negative 1, our k was a negative 6, so our vertex is negative 1, negative 6. And when you draw this parabola right here, I'm just going to estimate it for right now. When you draw this parabola right here, it's upward, right? And you know that your axis of symmetry is going to cut down the middle, which is always cutting through the vertex. That's your middle line. So that means it has to be x equals whatever this one is because it's cutting through at negative 1. So that's your axis of symmetry. Another thing you will need to find for this particular problem is your y-intercept. Where does it cross the y-axis? So you know that when it crosses somewhere over here, it's 0, comma something. And that means we have to use our original equation and plug in 0 for x to find out what y is, just like we did on the other one. So I'm going to have y plus 6 equals 2, 1 squared. 2 times 1, or 1 squared is 1, and 2 times 1 is 2. And we'll subtract 6, and I'll get y equals negative 4. So I'm going to get 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is negative 4. That would be my y-intercept. So if I was asking for what the y-intercept was, you would say that the y-intercept is 0, negative 4. You would not say y equals negative 4 because that's an equation of a line that looks like this. Okay, so make sure it's an actual point because a y-intercept is a point, not a line. An axis of symmetry, like this guy, is an equation of a line, not a point either. Since this parabola is going to cross right here and here somewhere, you need to find your x-intercepts. Okay, on this particular problem above, we probably could have found the x-intercepts for these or these. These and these, I mean, these 2 points. Where does it cross the x-axis? So let's do it for this one. This is an easier problem to first find the x-intercepts. if I asked for the x-intercepts on a test, where would you graph it? Well, if you notice, this is going to be something comma 0 and something comma 0. That means that my y for sure is 0. So I'm going to do kind of what I did for the y-intercept, but instead of, I'm going to use my original equation, correct? And instead of plugging in 0 for x, I have to plug in 0 for y. And I'm going to solve this equation. Well, this would be 6 equals 2x plus 1 squared. Got to get rid of the 2, so I'm going to divide 2 by both sides. I would get 3. When you have something that's squared and you want to get rid of it, you square root both sides. Whenever you square root both sides, you have to write plus or minus radical 3 in this case. X plus 1, and you would just subtract 1, and you would have x equals this. Okay? So you need to find what these answers are in decimal form. So you have the point right now, -1 plus radical 3, comma 0, and I would accept this answer on the test. And -1 minus radical 3, comma 0, and these would be your 2 points. And that's where they cross here and here. You could plug those in for me. The only reason you have to find the decimal answer is because you need to know where it lies on the graph. So when you do -1 plus the square root of 3 in your calculator, in some calculators you need to do radical 3, find out what that is in your calculator, and then subtract 1. You should get 7.3, so make sure you know how to find that in your calculator. This one, I would do the square root of radical 3, make sure it's negative, and then add a -1, and you should get -2.73. And if you're having trouble, please ask your teacher in class so you don't make a mistake. So now we're going to plug in, if the answer for 0.73 would be about right here, and the answer for -2.73, we'll put like right here, -2.73. So the -2.73 answer was -1 plus, or minus, excuse me, minus radical 3, and the answer for 0.3 was -1 plus radical 3. And you should be giving the radical answers. If I asked you what the x-intercept was, you shouldn't give me the decimal answer. You should give me the radical answer. And like I said, the only reason you find these decimal answers is so you know exactly where to graph them on graph.